My dear friends, it's good to have you all back again for yet another time to share my wisdom, experience, and knowledge about life and faith as a Christian. Dearly beloved, this will be an adventure of storytelling in series that covers every aspect of the Bible, so sit tight and take a comfortable position as we explore this together. This episode is on a topic titled Awareness and Shame, and we will zoom in on the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verses 7 to 10. After Adam and Eve had eaten the forbidden fruit, something profound and irreversible happened. For the first time since they were created, they saw themselves in a way they had never seen before. It was as if a veil had been lifted from their eyes, and the world around them, which had once been bathed in purity and innocence, now seemed harsh, stark, and overwhelming. They looked down at their bodies, at the way their skin gleamed in the sunlight, and they felt something they had never felt before. Vulnerability. They were naked, exposed, and with this newfound awareness came an emotion they had never known. Shame. Shame pressed in on them like a heavy weight, and they immediately wanted to cover themselves, to hide from the world and each other. What had once been a natural and innocent state of being now felt awkward, uncomfortable, and wrong. Their once open and pure hearts were now tainted by guilt. They had disobeyed God. They had eaten from the tree He had told them not to, and now the consequences of that disobedience were sinking in. In their desperation to cover themselves, Adam and Eve grabbed the nearest thing they could find, fig leaves. They hurriedly pulled the broad leaves from the trees, trying to piece them together, their hands shaking as they worked. They were clumsy and frantic, stitching the leaves into makeshift garments, hoping it would be enough to hide their shame. But deep down they knew that it wasn't just their bodies they were trying to cover. It was something much deeper. It was their hearts, their souls. Everything about them felt exposed. The purity they had known was gone, and in its place was a chasm of guilt and regret. For the first time they felt the heavy weight of sin. It gnawed at them, making them feel unworthy and distanced from the peace they had once known. How had this happened? How had one bite of fruit led to such an overwhelming sense of loss? And then they heard something that filled them with dread, the sound of God walking in the garden. The sound of God's footsteps had always been a source of joy for Adam and Eve. Every day, God would walk with them in the cool of the day, and they would talk together as friends. His presence had always been comforting, warm, and full of love. But now, in the wake of their disobedience, the sound of God approaching filled them with fear. Their hearts raced. They could not face Him, not now, not like this. How could they stand before Him when they had disobeyed Him so directly? When they had taken what was not theirs to take? Without thinking, they ran. They darted between the trees, hiding among the thick bushes and tall plants. They crouched low, their hearts pounding in their chests, holding their breath as if silence could somehow conceal them from the all-seeing eyes of their Creator. Maybe He won't find us, Eve whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and guilt. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. God knew everything. There was nowhere they could hide from Him. As Adam and Eve huddled together, trying to remain unseen, the voice of God rang out through the garden. "Where are you?" It wasn't a question of ignorance. God knew exactly where they were. But He wanted them to understand something deeper. His call was not a physical question. It was a spiritual one. In their attempt to hide, they had not only distanced themselves physically, but spiritually as well. Their hearts had pulled away from the intimacy they had once shared with God. God's voice was filled not with anger, but with sorrow and longing. He wasn't hunting them down to punish them. He was calling them back to Him, inviting them to step out of their shame and face Him with honesty. But Adam and Eve remained hidden, too ashamed to respond. The question was not just for Adam and Eve. It was a question that echoed throughout time, a question for all of humanity. When we fall, when we sin, when we hide in our guilt and shame, God calls out to us, asking, "Where are you?" He isn't looking for us to run farther into the darkness. He's inviting us back into his light. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Adam spoke. His voice was shaky, barely more than a whisper, but it broke the silence. "I heard you in the garden," Adam called out from behind the bushes. "And I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." The words were heavy with meaning. Adam had never been afraid of God before. Fear had never been a part of their relationship. But now, fear was there. Fear of judgment. Fear of what God would say. Fear of the consequences of his actions. And nakedness? Adam had been naked his whole life, but only now did it seem like something to be ashamed of. The physical nakedness was just a reflection of something deeper. A spiritual nakedness, a vulnerability that came from the awareness of their sin. "I was afraid, so I hid." Those words capture the essence of humanity's response to sin. When we fall short, we feel exposed, vulnerable, and ashamed. Instead of running to God for help, we often hide, thinking that our shame will be too much for him to bear. In that moment, Adam and Eve were experiencing the full weight of shame. It was a heavy burden, one that pressed down on their hearts and made them feel small, insignificant, and unworthy. This was the first time in their lives that they had felt distant from God. The connection they had once enjoyed, the closeness they had taken for granted, now seemed like a distant memory. What had they done? The serpent had promised wisdom, had promised that their eyes would be opened, but the only thing their eyes had opened to was their own brokenness. Their hearts ached with regret. The fruit had not brought them the enlightenment they had hoped for. Instead, it had brought only guilt, shame, and separation from the one who had given them everything. And now there they were, hiding in the bushes, ashamed and afraid to face the God who loved them. But God had not abandoned them. He was still there, calling to them, seeking them, just as he seeks us when we fall. One lesson we can take from this is that shame is one of the most powerful emotions we can experience. It makes us want to hide, to cover ourselves, to run away from the people who love us, and from the God who created us. It whispers lies into our hearts, telling us that we are unworthy, that we are beyond forgiveness. But God's question to Adam and Eve, "Where are you?" reminds us that even when we feel lost in our shame, God is still seeking us. He is still calling us back to him, longing for us to step out of hiding and into his grace. Therefore I urge you, my dear young ones, gathered here, and those listening at home or in their offices, if you find yourself hiding from God because of shame, remember that he is not far away. He is calling out to you, asking you to come back to him. Don't let shame keep you in hiding. Bring your brokenness to God and let him cover you with his grace. No matter how far you feel from him, he is always ready to welcome you back. Stay tuned for more. Do well to turn on notifications and hit the like button, for I trust you will enjoy the learnings from this series. Thank you for listening, and see you on the next one.